Hi, everybody. My name is Jimena Adbury, and I will be leading you down through the corridor to talk about each of the sub areas. We are going to be starting with the northernmost sub area here at Willow Street. What you're seeing here in the drawing is the purple dashed line represents an approximate project boundary of the interstate, and the dark pink ribbon, thicker lines represent the area of this interstate that's elevated, like Anthony mentioned before. And that is also the area that we will be looking at and trying to get your ideas for what might go underneath that structure. So what we want to hear from you are your big ideas for the understructure uses, such as the ones you saw in the examples just presented right now too. So I'll open up the floor so you can give us your thoughts and input, and we'll be glad to take note of it. Or if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them as well.
I have a question. So this is like where the, I guess on the north side of it is where the elevated portion of the structure will be.
All of that, whatever you see, the whole pink lines that you see there, fuchsia, whatever color you want to call that, is the portion of the interstate that will be elevated. And so we are looking for ideas on what to potentially put under there as uses.
Do we know what the height of the structure is going to be over on the north side over Castile and Martin Luther King Drive?
I think the height of it remains at 22 feet. However, that is not set in stone. And I've also heard there's a potential height of 30 feet, but I think the one that is being more studied is the 22 feet height, 22 foot height.
Okay, but at that point, since it's going to be pitching up, I guess what I'm curious about is will it be high enough at that point to have like a bike and pedestrian path coming through to connect those two roads and connect the west side of the corridor to the kind of more eastern, like kind of what looks like is, I think it was a former Walmart, will probably be like a commerce area at some point again.
Talking about this segment right here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can just clarify that really quickly. So what we did was, obviously there are moments where the main line has to go from grade and then ramping up to where it's at its full vertical height, whatever that vertical height ends up being. What we're depicting in the color banding is when it reaches its full vertical height. So regardless of whether it's 22 feet or 30 feet or whatever height gets, ultimately decided on, it's already at that height at this moment, and it's north of this moment that it ramps back down to connect to grade.
Okay, thank you. And are we expecting there to be on and off ramps coming out onto Willow Street?
The geometry isn't finalized either yet, but there will likely be some, like this is showing some idea of a connection ramp northbound in this location and then southbound in this location. But that's still all kind of being worked out with traffic and geometry.
So I seem to remember in one of the initial presentations, there was an idea of maybe like a double dog bone or double traffic loop, however it was phrased, over in this section. Is that no longer in the works?
I think that they're updating the traffic information because that changes all the time. And so the final geometry of the at grade part is still somewhat in flux because of that, which is why initially we were going to be looking at some of those things as part of workshop 3, but because it's still being kind of worked out based on new traffic information, what we do know is where the elevated portion is, which is why we kind of want to focus on that. It's kind of like almost reversed, but to answer your question, yes, I know what you mean. by the dog bones and the turnarounds and things like that. But that's not, I think, advanced enough for us to have shown that information as an overlay for this session.
Okay, so one question I have, and it's probably going to be a common theme. I'm a downtown resident, and I'm over here frequently at Super One and Home Depot, all that. Look, this has becoming one of our corridors for panhandling and homeless tents. And I hate to even sound like this, but what kind of infrastructure could be put into place to deter that? Or are there options that we would be discussing that would encourage it?
Yes,
Like if we do, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, yeah, no, you have a very good point, and that's quite a recurring theme when we talk about the understructure of these spaces. And there are several things. The way to deal with that is to make these spaces usable and active, so people other than the homeless are actually using them. Another way is to put in lighting that can, make these spaces feel safer to be able to be used by other people other than the homeless, and deter them from using it.
With Willow and the thruway and whatnot being such a high traffic area, connection between these two areas, is this a safe place for people to actually, I mean, given the size of it, it's not the biggest area that we're talking about. Is it safe to encourage people to be under it?
I think we can make that an area that can be safe to be used by anybody. I mean, that's one of the most important things we want to highlight about this. Is safety is one of the priorities when we're designing this.
Regarding safety, are these the feeder roads on either side? Are those going to be dual direction traffic, or is it one way on each side, northbound and southbound?
I believe they're one way because those feeders are intended to serve the main line. So for example, where Willow dives, goes under the main line, this would be southbound ramping up. This would be southbound ramping down to Willow, and vice versa on the other side.
Okay.
They
Okay.
would
So
have,
that being said,
yeah.
That being said, in this area is currently one of the deadliest for pedestrians in Lafayette, and that's without high speed off traffic coming. That's with signalized. Basically all your signalized intersections that are there now would still be there after. And so, I think a high concern for me would be ensuring that pedestrian connectivity and pedestrian use generally in the area. Like right now, it's pretty much at the worst it could be, and then you'd only be intensifying the use. So anything that can be done to improve pedestrian safety and usability of this section would be much needed. Currently there's not really any sidewalks anywhere through that area. There's no shoulder on any of the service roads, or frontage roads rather. And you have a high speed terminus of I-49. And so that all is leading to a deadly situation. And any discussion of this area, that needs to be the very first discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll agree with Charles on that. The just folks being able to get to the grocery store and back more or less in this area safely would probably take precedent over any additional, parks or activity type space. I mean, if we could have green space and some sort of drainage there added in with the safe pedestrian walkways, I think that would be a good use of it.
Yeah.
I would like to chime in to echo that sentiment. I mean, just last year we had a death. That's why I brought up Castile Castile Street is because there was a cyclist death, someone trying to cross there, probably to get to the Super One, probably because they didn't have any other type of transportation. And probably because they felt unsafe to do it on Willow Street, which is high traffic, high speed, and not really a safe place for bicycles and pedestrians. So if we can think about it in terms of like where can people safely cross? Can we build independent paths that aren't attached to the main street? Or if we can tie it into some of these like kind of tertiary or secondary streets like Donlin and MLK and Castile, and then connect those somehow to these high traffic areas like the grocery store. I mean, we have an opportunity here to reduce a lot of traffic deaths.
Yeah,
I would dovetail that with the thought that traffic at Willow in this intersection, this is where your on ramp, off ramps are going to be. That's where all the traffic is going to be funneled coming to and from these side neighborhoods. So it's probably, I mean, my appreciation is it may actually make the situation a little bit worse for pedestrian traffic. And so if we could just focus on mitigating that, then I think that's probably sufficient for this track.
okay.
So these are all, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I would just want to add, further that this entire project, is having a disproportionate impact on poor and minority communities, and also a disproportionate lack of benefit for those same communities. And so in this area, you already have a lack of pedestrian infrastructure in a minority poor area, and neither of those is going to benefit from an elevated freeway. The only way they could possibly get benefit is for ample connectivity built into the project. And we're talking about mitigating impacts, and there's been no effort to avoid the disproportionate impacts to the minority population in Lafayette. This is basically getting dumped in that population and on a poor group of people for the benefit of people who don't live there. And so any discussion of benefits in the project should center around something that actually adds value. And since they're not getting any transportation value out of this, they should get some through pedestrian transportation at least.
I think that's all really good. I mean, I did not expect active uses to be a primary driver of this area. So it's kind of in line with what I was expecting. So in the interest of kind of moving to the next one, I just want to kind of quickly recap what we've heard. So pedestrian connectivity and safety is paramount for this area, and that should be the primary focus. There might be some opportunity for landscape treatments, but more or less, this is a passive space with stronger and safer pedestrian and bicycle connectivity ties.
Yeah, and I would add, it's not necessarily all passive. I mean, you could even add in, bus hubs and things of that nature, which would also be, quite needed in the area. Pedestrian jumps out, but there's no reason you couldn't add.
So Charles, whenever you say a bus hub, do you mean a bus stop, or do you mean like when there's actually, a part of the roadway carved out into the side the bus can pull off onto?
I mean, yeah, like a bus stop, bus hub, Sorry, my internet's kind of breaking up, but I mean, it could be a bus hub, it could be just simple several stops, but all of the above need to be in discussion here. If we're talking about active uses, there's plenty of opportunity for active use in transportation in the area for minority and well, I guess in this case it'd be low income population.
Sure, no, I get what you're saying on that, but No, I was just wanting to clarify because I would echo that if bus hub, and look, y'all, I'm having trouble finding the words for it, but is to where the bus actually comes off of if we have a sections built into where the buses can actually come off of the main roadway in order to more safely load passengers and unload passengers, then I think that would be an added type benefit for the area.
Yeah, you're like suggesting that like something
Yep.
like this, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And that maybe that's in both directions. Assuming, so there's a bus line running up and down Willow. It would bring people into this central hub, and then I'll just use a different color. And then there are routes that allow for safe crossing to different places, right? Something like
I think that's a good idea.
okay.
Hey, Anthony, I think, from my perspective, some of the most important parts of it is to connect Castile and MLK and provide some kind of back connection through the Willow Clifton Chenier complex to MLK.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and agree with Neil on that. Those like kind of like back routes, like as somebody that's a cyclist and has been studying like bicycle like habits for a while, like people, if it's not that much of a detour, people will go out of their way on a bike to avoid really busy areas because it's just too unpredictable. There's too many possibilities of cars coming from different directions that like you just can't control. So it's easier to just go on a quieter street if you have to go a quarter mile out of your way or something.
Makes sense.
Right. And
Yeah, I like the idea that we would do more of a direct connection to a government services, government asset, and then possibly having a light there that we would have some kind of guarded crossing into the Super One shopping complex. Another thing I haven't heard either is the potential here at Willow Street to have some kind of gateway entrance kind of marker or art piece or some kind of welcome to Lafayette kind of signature piece here at the Willow intersection.
Yeah, and that, let's note that, well, let's put that under art, I guess, but, or it could be under even urban design, but let me, yeah, I know at one of the earlier workshops, and I don't know if this is like the right location per se, but it's just documenting it. But we had talked about the main line and that there might be a signature element at the core, but that also the two northern and southern gateways in could potentially have a feature. And I know when the our bridge team showed some renderings of the elevated main line, they talked through some potential incorporation of things. So, but yeah, but that's definitely something that we'll note here as, I'll put it under art for lack of a better topic. But yes, this is a logical gateway. Sorry, I just zoomed way out.
So going back to the pedestrian and bicycle discussion, we will be having a much more in-depth discussion and talk about the pedestrian and bicycle components and how they fit into this area. So, but these are all excellent comments.
I do need to send some information to the Lafayette group that LCG has developed a wayfinding and signage program that includes pedestrian and bicyclists as well. Mm-hmm. A unified look and design, and we would, I will submit that to the Lafayette Connector Partner team for you guys to go through. But I think from our perspective, that's something that we want to see, on the ground to tie our system together throughout the city, mm-hmm. versus coming up with something brand new just for I-49.
Right, thank you.
I'd like to piggyback off of what Neil just said about the wayfinding thing. Bike Lafayette's also working with the same designers that helped with the wayfinding project. We're working to create a bike map of Lafayette that shows like recommended routes and like safe crossings to get from like one area to another. And once we figure out this these connectivity things, like that can be incorporated into this map.
Yeah.
And so I think identifying these kind of areas is really important, and then we can follow it up with a lot of public outreach around it and start getting the idea about where safe connections could be in the future. And one more thought that just occurred to me, James brought up homelessness and kind of like encampments underneath the structure. And I think somebody had mentioned something about like drainage and water management as well. It might be possible to do like water retention ponds or something. I don't
Yeah, going
in
back
that
up,
area, because there's a lot of surface area, and I mean, I don't know if that fits within the drainage requirements for this area or if it's possible, but that would be a good deterrent to encampments.
yeah, and it would be something that could easily be integrated with landscape treatment and trail connectivity and all that kind of thing. So I'm going to note that there. And this is one of the sub areas that actually has space for something like that. So that is noted. We don't have to spend an equal amount of time on all these. So if there are some that just naturally want to have a more involved conversation like Willow, because of its challenges with pedestrian connectivity now, and then it's very kind of dicey to cross and all those things, we spent a little bit more time on it, and that I'm fine with that. This is the Laplace Sterling Grove area, which is much more straightforward. It's less complex because it doesn't have that Willow interchange. But does anybody have any unique thoughts for this segment?
Yeah, if I could, so I'm Simcoe and Pierce, so you're a stone throw from me. The map kind of messes with me going east-west instead of north-south. But let's see, are we going to have any of the streets? Is a worry in my neighborhood, or at least in my side of it, is that Simcoe is going to get blocked off by this. Is that a worry? Are we looking at shutting down any of the roadways?
Certainly not Simcoe, because it's kind of a major.
Yeah, it stretches all the way.
Yeah, it stretches all the way. So it's what, a traffic engineer might refer to as a collector. In terms of some of the other streets, there may be a need to have some of them truncated for ramps and things. But again, that's something that's still being fleshed out by the traffic engineers that are kind of working with a new analysis. So this is starting to show the notion of there might be something here, but it's not final, which is why we didn't want to focus too much on that.
Sure. If I could just
going over.
If I could just advocate early though.
Yeah.
Simcoe, Mud, Buchanan, these are main throughways that if we cut into it, it's going to cause us problems.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll second that, James. Also, one thing that's going to be continuous throughout all these sections up to Pinhook is a dedicated linear multi-use path from Willow all the way to at least Pinhook, possibly University. That is for the exclusive use of pedestrians and or bicyclists.
Yeah, double that on with Neil's comment there.
I want to point out something too, but it's right at the border of this sub area and the previous one, but there's a coulee that goes across that border. And I'm looking at a map of bike and pedestrian crashes over the past 10 years. And there's a really big cluster just right on the south side of the coulee around Bellow Street there. So, I mean, just coming back to ways that people have to like cross things when they're on foot or on a bike, like a coulee is one of those things that you don't think about when you're in a car because there's bridges there for you, but they're not there for pedestrians and cyclists. So if we can do something in that area, which is already just from the crash data here being used pretty frequently as a crossing, we can improve that area, go with what people are already doing and work with that, then I think that would be a key area for improvement.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as like active space over here, like we have City Park 2 blocks to the east. We have the J.W. James Playground that we renovated and cleaned up multiple times, and there's not much use out of them. So I don't know that we necessarily need that type space here, but if it is a pedestrian, if it's simply a pedestrian focused area to where somebody could do something as simple as walk their dog, that would be appreciated. Some of the only space that's available within walking distance, at least on the west side of this, is likely going to be taken up when LPTFA comes in and does the Monroe Street apartments like they did Uptown Lost, which I'm for those projects. You're just acknowledging you're going to miss out on some of those spaces. So any of that would be appreciated, but otherwise I don't think it needs to be active space. I like the idea of the path very much, the bicycle and pedestrian stretching all the way to Pinhook. I think that's great.
Yeah. Okay.
And to add on to something James brought up earlier, when he mentioned, maintaining connectivity on these old cross streets, several are likely to be cut off because of off ramps, etc. I think there needs to be some sort of focus on how to keep the area to the west, I guess, to the west, from becoming an isolated just island blocked off by the railroad tracks and the interstate on the other side. If more, we currently have blocked off areas that's got a lot of residential in that little strip, and then if you cut off even more, it's going to truly become an island. So I'd like to see any effort that can be made to maintain vehicular connectivity where possible, and where not, even more so get pedestrian connectivity.
Right, because you're suggesting like this is that island that you're sort of referring to here.
Yes, yeah. And then, unlike a lot of that area, there are a lot of residences back in that area. And it's people who live there for a long time. If I remember correctly, I think Toby Picard's grandmother used to live back in that area. But it's still one of the few places that has maintained a neighborhood character, despite this project being, laid out for years and years and years right there. And to make it a little worse would be anything that can be done to avoid making it an island would be good.
Well, that's right on top of it looks like a historic neighborhood and a cultural district. I can't remember because the overlays aren't there, but
It's not the historic district. It's on the other side. The Sterling Grove is on the other side of
right. But Laplace is
from
it's either a cultural or a historic district. Laplace is either a cultural.
I don't believe it's cultural.
It's a historic district.
I believe so.
Laplace.
They are working and they are working on putting together a historic district for Laplace, but it may not be as large as the neighborhood as it's being depicted, or as the coterie is known.
I'm on the Preservation Commission. That's who I'm here with. So yeah, cool. We review that stuff, but there's a very good historic character there. When are we going to see, I don't know if we're ever going to see kind of an overlay of all the historic properties being along the affected areas, or the impact reports on that? Is that on your website where all the resources are?
It could be. We'll double check that. I know that there's an awful lot of resources on the website throughout this whole long history of this process. And it could be very well be that is on the website, but I can double check that.
We'll reach out to you and get you to the source of those.
Yeah, I'm going to make
Anne brings up a good point there, though, that the Section 106 process is taking place, but sort of like I tried to mention with the contaminated site near Freetown, without having a good idea of where the Section 106 properties are, so we know what y'all are trying to avoid impacting, it's harder to have all these discussions if they're taking place in silos. And so
last I looked, there were no historic properties in the right of way or immediately adjacent to it.
But immediately adjacent to, when you completely change the character of the neighborhood, would be a constructive use of that neighborhood. And so it would be an impact. It would be visual, physical, and noise, all impacting that property, which would qualify under section 4F if the Preservation Commission is pursuing historic designation for this area. That would 100% matter. So I think trying to have these conversations in silos is somewhat counterproductive. I just wanted to make that statement.
With a different question for a second. The current thruway and basically what's in the middle of it, the fast food place that just shut down, the crack hotel in the middle, are those things those are gone, right?
You're talking about where the Coca-Cola building is?
No, wait, Coca-Cola, are you talking about Four Corners or are we talking about Simcoe and the thruway?
Sorry, you said something about the hotel that was knocked down. That was near the.
No, I don't know the name of it. It's a crack hotel right there in the middle of the thruway on Simcoe across from St. Genevieve. Is that stuff gone as a part of this?
I would imagine so, yes. Yeah, everything adjacent here would have to be, yes.
Okay. And is this going to affect St. Genevieve's?
No.
These are all great points and questions, and I'm glad that we're able to capture them on the notes. In the interest, I would love to get some other voices. I think Kathy might be on the line with us. Kathy, if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share about it, or any other voices that we haven't yet heard from, we would love to get some input.
I do want to move on to the next sub area, just in the interest of time. We don't have to spend as much time on this one unless you want to, because we talked quite a bit about the central core the last time, but I mean, we did a lot of that talking and we didn't hear, you folks didn't have an opportunity. So, but just to give you the context, so this is where we just left. That's that area we were just talking about. And the main line goes from this straight tangent, makes this curve to another straight tangent. And this is the section adjacent to downtown. The one unique thing about this segment is this is that potential wider span that was talked about at one of the earlier workshops, where there could be a larger span over Johnston. And so that's the only thing unique. Otherwise, these piers are all evenly spaced.
Where are y'all looking at doing the on-ramp, off-ramps? Is there going to be the immediate downtown access here?
I think what you're seeing just conceptually in this is on either side of this segment. So this segment is what you see, and then connections on either end of it. But that's, again, still in flux and still being kind of worked on. The geometry is still being worked on.
Okay. Do we have an update on the contamination in the rail yard site as to what possible restrictions we would have on uses for this area?
I can't give you a definitive answer, but we did look at that because we wanted to be able to be responsive to it. And, you know, the term that's used, industrial grade or whatever, industrial levels, actually precludes very few uses. It precludes schools, it precludes things like that, probably maybe housing, I don't know. But I guess what we looked at was it's not precluding uses that we had started to look at. So the idea that ground plane is more or less capped, and then the pavements and other uses that we showed are all possible. So we're fairly comfortable saying that we don't think that the uses that we started to suggest would be precluded.
So parks in the area wouldn't be contrary to an industrial use restoration?
It did not seem so, no.
Okay, I mean, I personally don't see any possibility of, you know, having kids, you know, playing in industrial level lead and asbestos dust, but that's just me. I guess that's, you know.
I think to clarify, though, it wouldn't, those surfaces wouldn't be exposed. Anything that is. Yep.
So this area, so that also answers further questions. So this likely wouldn't be a green space. It would likely be a hardscape that we'd be trying to figure out uses on top of concrete.
Likely, yes, because it's under a structure. And so what we were showing in some of the imagery at the beginning is there, and I'm a landscape architect, so trust me, like there's all kinds of things that you can do. There's opportunities for green space for sure. And one of the things is once the final height is determined, we'll have a better sense of daylight, and we can do a sunshade study and all those kinds of things. But there are opportunities, like you can see in some of these images, for planters, raised planters, things like that.
It would be hard.
Yeah, it would be like mostly hard space. Yeah, because it's under the structure.
Given that, with us wanting downtown to be especially Jefferson area to be like the walking area, is there a way with that on-ramp or that overpass already right there at Jefferson to dog ear that strip on either side of that road for parking so that people can walk across to that side of downtown and have that free walk space? What I think that would also help us do is for those of us that live in the adjacent neighborhoods of downtown, and I don't speak for Freetown, of course, but I imagine they run into the same problem. Anytime we have a festival, a Mardi Gras, anything of that nature that brings everybody downtown, our neighborhoods become the parking lot, and more importantly, they become the trash can. I can't walk my dog for weeks afterwards because it's just broken glass everywhere. And I may exaggerate a little bit to emphasize my point, but the point remains the same. So if that strip that gives us access to downtown could be used to increase the parking in the area and divert that over to from our neighborhood to it, that would be appreciated for me.
Mhm.
Any other hardscape ideas?
I have a question that's kind of maybe related to the next sub area, but I see there's some maybe some ramps coming on and off, or are we looking at the possibility of, and this ties into this sub area, but are we looking at the possibility of a on and off ramp connection at Taft Street or Pinhook? Is that what that is?
I think that is what that's showing, is that had been begun to be looked at when this, I'm just going to jump ahead to this one. So there's no point in not looking at it, but yeah, this was starting to look at this area as a potential on and off, and then the other end that we showed. But like I say, these are very, very conceptual. So that's why they're not showing all these points of connection and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Hey, Anthony,
but we're unlikely to have anything on Johnson Street.
Well, so the Johnson Street was where that larger span is potentially shown. And that's what was highlighted during workshop number 2 as a potential signature element. So that's why that potential longer span is shown at Johnston.
Okay.
Hey, Anthony, if we could go back to the Johnson Street section, I think there's an opportunity there to do some kind of reliefs on the structural columns in that area.
Yep. Yeah, and particularly, let me try to get my pen up here. So it's got a slight delay all of a sudden. There we go. Particularly if this is a signature element, these columns would be, let's say more important than some of the other ones. So that could be very logical there. And in fact, that could be translated in other places. Like if 6th Street were, a place where people are connecting through and even at Jefferson. But yes, those are all options. I'm going to mention that in the.
Yeah, I would expand that to other areas where it's possible. One of the other things from an urban design perspective is the service road in this area, and that we, looking at a grand boulevard design, maybe being anchored off of the northbound thruway versus the southbound thruway, but certainly having a grand boulevard in the design concepts, which would help support longer block lengths and better development abilities for that area right adjacent to the mainline structure between the thruways, current thruway and the mainline structure. With the mainline structure providing some of the parking and stormwater retention facilities for that possible development.
Yeah, I'm just going to zoom back in. Sorry, I was just finishing that. I believe at the next workshop, we'll get into that too. So you're referring to the boulevard, and I think we're going to be getting into two options, with a boulevard and a couplet option, which make use of what is currently the Evangeline Thruway. So I think what you're saying is that there's this spine here that's at grade, and then there's this space between them, that spine and the main line, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, I'm drawing that really sloppily. But yeah, so that you were suggesting that would be potential green space or did you say stormwater management?
Well, I think in that void there, we would want to actually shift the Grand Boulevard and have it based off of the northbound thruway, giving us a much longer block length. I mean, we would go from about 150-foot block length to pretty close to 400-foot block length.
I see what you're saying.
So it would increase the spacing of the Grand Boulevard from the main line and allow us to do some infill development in between.
I see what you're saying. So potentially shift Grand Boulevard to the northbound Evangeline. Yeah, okay.
And this is Kathy. Can I add something?
Sure.
Sorry, I've got a bunch of reverb on my phone here.
Kathy, do you have your computer audio on as well? If so,
I'm muted.
Okay,
Sorry, we can hear you.
go ahead. That's fine. Go ahead, Kathy.
I'm going to draw this sloppily. We lose her?
While we're waiting on Kathy, I just have a comment on Neil's idea there. I like the idea of having the area open for development right there, especially if it allows detention in the area. But there's been all this concern previously in rejecting ideas that the CWG group had brought forth based on the number of properties acquired. And it seems that would be, something that if our prior designs and suggestions got rejected about, possibly relocating the main line, that this seems like it would probably get rejected as well. And also I would have some concern about just general displacements for the sake of redevelopment. That sounds, like something that we try to move away from. But I do personally think, Neil mentions a lot of good positives, which I think are very valuable to consider. I just have some concern about the viability of it being accepted both by FHWA and by the community when you have even more displacements right there.
Okay, Kathy, I think you're unmuted now if you want to go ahead and try again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I was just going to add, I think it looks like you fixed the problem, but you're showing the green area as the developable area we're talking about. But is it my understanding then you couldn't have stormwater ponds under here at this location?
I wouldn't rule that out. I mean, if that's something that is viable and that people think is important, I think that's certainly could be incorporated.
Because the thought would be between parking and stormwater management, you could potentially allow more developable area on the Grand Boulevard, between downtown and the Grand Boulevard.
I think I'm going to try to record that. Hold on, I'm just having a little glitch here. So I think what I'm hearing from folks is rather than, I'm going to fix this, don't worry. Rather than force a lot of programming under the main line, use the space under the main line for more, what's the word I want? Like functional things like stormwater management, parking, and then that makes the spaces outside of the main line more viable for other things, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm struggling with this.
And I would just like to add, I do 100% agree with the trying to find stormwater management within the footprint of the main line. I just want to voice concern about that being the stormwater management being in a likely contaminated area that would possibly break the hard pan clay of the soil if we tried to put stormwater management.
Yeah,
there.
that actually is a good point. That would be one use where we would have to look at that very carefully, because in order to create stormwater management, it requires excavation. And that's a valid point. So that is something I'm going to know, but it's, it would have to be obviously vetted and investigated and deemed viable, but that's a very good point. I am going to move on to the next one, just again for time. Hold on 1 second. Why is this not panning? There we go. So Freetown, Puerto Rico, Macomb Vise, again, right after we leave the downtown core, we have this sort of line in the sand at 11th Street. And the only reason for that was because we just felt that there's this straight tangent running adjacent to the core, and then it starts to make this curve. And then the block grid continues, but the character starts to change again from like this sort of like open brownfield space that exists today adjacent to downtown to a more residentially grained neighborhood. And so this is kind of like how we compartmentalized this segment.
My comment in this general area is noise reduction, and light pollution control. Those to me are the two of the largest priorities throughout this whole area, because it's largely residential. And we've spoken about the need for bike paths and connectivity, which I think continues on, especially taking Neil's earlier comment about a linear path. But I think the need to manage noise, which the fact that this project has selected this location without studying noise and its impact on the historic neighborhood and the likely historic neighborhood of Macomb, and to reemphasize the minority and low socioeconomic populations, which are disproportionately impacted, then you further add noise and light pollution on top of smog, etc. I think those two, downlighting and noise reduction, are my two biggest concerns here.
Okay. Yeah, otherwise, this segment is very similar to the one we looked at with LaPlace, where it's, a fairly straight segment adjacent to residential neighborhoods, some historic context. So a lot of the same factors will probably be applied here, as you say, like pedestrian connectivity and that kind of thing. But are there any other unique things to, let's say, Freetown, Puerto Rico, Macomb Vise that we might want to document here that we haven't already kind of ticked that will probably apply to all of these areas?
Well, I think the historic residential character of the neighborhoods, the likelihood that they will be commercialized beyond their current residential status, if there's any protective covenants that can be put in place, that would help. Most of my concerns beyond the possible pollution and excavating adjacent to my neighborhood, and all the dust that would bring, is the induced demand for development and induced traffic along Taft, Pinhook, Johnson Street, and then University during construction. But so anything that can be done to minimize noise, both within the footprint itself and on the induced traffic through the adjacent neighborhoods, And anything that can be done to protect the largely residential character of the neighborhoods would also help.
Okay.
How about to enhance the neighborhoods, something that is not currently existing in the neighborhoods, what that you can see going under the structure?
Well, largely there under the structure, I think, like I said before, a multi-use path would be largely beneficial. Any possible detention, which would stop we currently don't have a drainage problem in Freetown, except on some roadways during flash floods. If that were to, it's a marginal point here. And so if that's exacerbated by this project, that would have a largely damaging impact. So any excess detention that could be put in place would benefit the neighborhood. And Kathy has done a lot of work trying to work on Garfield Linear Park, Garfield Greenway along Garfield for our neighborhood. And if that were to be accentuated by improvements in the in multi-use connectivity, that would help. But as far as amenities beyond that, I think it's more we're looking more at protection than looking for pie in the sky development.
A thought kind of occurred to me as we're talking about a multi-use path, and I think from the Lafayette Connector Group that you guys need to really impress upon the members of this group the characteristics of the thruway and how much that's going to change from traffic counts, and it'll be much more localized traffic, and most of the bulk traffic will be on the main line, and what opportunities that provides us. And if we want to encourage more bicyclists with a multi-use path, pedestrians, that maybe in certain areas we should have some kind of a little pit stop for these people, where they can have like a bench, an air compressor station, and a water fountain.
I just asked something that was kind of thinking along the same lines of what Neil said, but I'm kind of curious if there's a plan for the old Reinhardt property, if that's going to continue to operate as is, or I'm not really sure. Maybe Kathy, you could get some more clarity on this. And is that like part of the kind of issue with the contamination from the rail site? That's between Taft and the railway and that large property there. As far as I'm aware, it's not being used, but I don't live in the area. But if it's not a contamination issue there, then and if Taft is going to be affected from a traffic perspective, which like Taft already has bike lanes on it that connects to Vermilion and brings people downtown, but also brings people toward the university and through Freetown. So I think that's a good like kind of bicycle and pedestrian connection. So maybe having like some sort of passive kind of or even more active like park thing in that area, since there's a lot of residential, that could be beneficial for both neighborhoods on either side.
Yeah, and Freetown doesn't currently have any parks within the neighborhood. That would be on the edge of our neighborhood, but that particular site is one of the ones that we have major concerns about contamination. So I'd be reluctant to encourage that there. I would encourage, as a mitigation of the project, remediating that property to better than industrial levels. But also, to Neil's point, it brought up a question for me. Do we have any idea what the projected traffic counts would be on the thruway after the project?
That's something that our traffic engineers would have to speak to. And I know that we will be able to pull all that conversation together at some point soon, but I don't think we have that answer yet, no. Because I think what we're trying to do, and I know it's frustrating to do this in some compartmentalized fashion, but we need to get some cohesive, representative project together, and then that can be analyzed for all those adverse impacts. But until there's an actual project design, it can't be assessed for traffic noise, visual impact, all those things. So I know sometimes it feels a little bit like cart before the horse, but there is kind of like a methodology to this process that we're in.
Well,
I think, I mean,
and I
in
appreciate-
terms, continue, Charles. You started first.
Well, I appreciate that, Anthony. My main concern with any input that I'm giving is that after having read the prior EIS, there were very specific plans put in place for very specific things that were impacted, and with any change in the design, those become irrelevant. So to me, it's if every bit of feedback I give, if I say I'd like to see retention ponds put there, and then that ends up in the EIS, and then we end up with contamination found at the site, so they don't put the retention ponds, but that was a priority listed by me and my neighborhood, then that gets pushed off. So then rather than having to request something that was possible, we end up with something that's impossible. So, just like Neil said, if the nature of traffic along the thruway is actually reduced drastically, if traffic along Johnson doesn't end up with induced demand, and along Pinhook doesn't have induced demand, and Taft doesn't have induced demand, then I might have completely different requests. But if I say I want, that, certain things are a priority for me right now, and then the reality is like those things would never get used and they would just be wasted ideas. I don't want to add that into the EIS and throw my support behind it, because then it was squandered on something that when my input could have been utilized validly, I guess.
Understood.
All your input is good. I mean, I wouldn't limit my input based on that. I would give any input because what we're getting is input. It's not like you're voting or lobbying for a certain thing. It's just we're gathering all the input that you would like.
Tim, if y'all quote me in any saying that Freetown, Puerto Rico neighborhood supported anything that isn't able to get built.
I mean, if you request something and it can't be done, there'll be a reasoning for it. But it may be done. There's a lot of these things that may be done, and we wouldn't want to necessarily anybody not to give a suggestion or input just because they think there's a chance it might not be done.
No, Tim, giving input for the chance of it not being done versus it being done and being done poorly and creating a negative for our neighborhood, when had we had all the information, we could have given a positive suggestion rather than a negative one. That's my concern. If I say that I'd like to see it go through the project be built through the rail yard, and then everybody says, oh yeah, that's because it's vacant land, but then it turns out it's contaminated and it's going to pollute the aquifer, and all the residents in my neighborhood are going to have to deal with asbestos and lead dust, then I would have regretted having said I like that location. So that's a prime example of why I think having all the information is important when y'all ask us these questions. Instead of siloing us and asking us questions independently of other questions, I think it's important that we have the opportunity to have all the info that y'all have in making suggestions.
That
How many more sections we have to go through?
anything could pop up with anything, and you can always put caveats. You can put that caveat in your statement. That's completely fine.
if we don't know what we don't know, how can we make the caveats? That's my point.
Well, nobody knows everything, but if you don't at least try, you know.
I would hope that y'all know more than we do. Otherwise, everybody's just flying blind in this project.
And we still have, we're going to have public meetings, and all along the process, there's going to be room for input. So along the way, as additional information comes forward and we present it to the public and present it to everyone, you could always come back and say, you know, through the process, well, since this finding, you know.
Are we gonna be able to get through the other ones?
Yeah, somebody just asked how many are left. There's only one more, and it's at Khalees Saloom, and it's kind of a more unique area because of the fact that it's not a long linear section of the main line, but rather after you've crossed the river and gone by the airport, this is an elevated portion that allows for an interchange between Khalees Saloom and the main line. So there's not a whole lot of space here, but we did want to look at it just because these are elevated sections of roadway. But basically where Hugh Wallace is parallel with the railroad tracks, there's some space here. And it may be that it's more of the same where there's an emphasis on connectivity, potential stormwater management, passive space, but we want to hear that from you guys if that's accurate.
In that particular area, I would like to see the footprint minimized to allow development closer to the roadway. For instance, on the Hugh Wallace side right there, there's that triangle piece of property, which is relatively new. That was done at about the time that hotel was built. And so, you know, all of Hugh Wallace right there up until that point is, you know, subpar road. And then right there, it kind of gets, you know, it's been improved, but, you know, that leaves this large undeveloped piece of property for little reason in an otherwise developable tract. And then, you know, the feeder roads that are designed around it just seem a little, you know, excessive based on that sort of footprint problem. And then with the school right there, anything that can be done to pull the you know, the roads where it's not just a large block of high-speed roadway right in front of the school would also benefit. So currently there's the feeder roads adjacent to the tract or to the ramp. If those were to either be,
are you talking about these?
You know, moved if those were to be moved further away so that you could have developable tracks between them and the main line, or be pushed even closer to reduce the footprint, either of those would be more beneficial to me.
Is this the location that y'all are looking at for a Southern Gateway, welcome to the city type deal?
Yes.
Oops. Yes, this would be a potential place for that.
To go back to the previous comment about we don't know what we don't know. I mean, isolating certain types of information and getting feedback is a strategy of gathering surveys. But if there is a point in which we could have one of these workshops where all the gathered information, relevant gathered information, was overlaid on the map, like historic properties, like polluted areas, like in low-income neighborhoods, as points on the map, that would be useful. I mean, at least for me, I've only done site planning on a very small scale, like 20 acres, but seeing all the layers in one place, you know, highlighted things for me that I wouldn't have seen if I had just looked at the different points that I'd created independently of each other. And so if we had, you know, y'all only identify nationally significant on impact. We have our local register as well. That could be overlaid, and everything else like that on one map.
Yeah. And you know, that's something that I've heard now a few times tonight. So I think, like, for example, at the next workshop, which might be the one where we start looking at the at-grade roadways, like, for example, what will become of the Evangeline, whether it be Boulevard or whatever, and all the bike ped connectivity, that might be then where we want to, versus coming back with just like you're seeing now, just an overlay of the road and the potential bike, path or whatever, that there's all these adjacent layers populated on it so that you have a more comprehensive sense of the relevant data. That might be something that
When y'all look at doing a welcome to the city gateway,
Mhm.
and I'm sorry to shift gears for a second, but it just struck me. Is there a way to basically have it to where it focuses not just on the people driving from the south, but the folks that are exiting the airport right around there?
Yeah, I think that's possible.
Can be kind of that last view of people coming in on the runway.
Yeah, it's very close. Yeah. Okay.
This might be something that we talk about and when we focus more on pedestrian and bicycle connectivity, but there's not a lot of safe ways to cross the river in this kind of not really like in this area, but between this area and the last one that we were looking at. I mean, like the thruway is not a safe crossing. Surrey Street is definitely not safe. But this Hugh Wallace Road, I mean, if that's something that is maybe like identified as potential improvement, then if we could put some sort of, I don't think it has wide sidewalks or like shoulders on it. So that might be something that could be improved possibly as the scope of this project if we're anticipating more traffic coming through on that road. I think that bridge would need to be improved because it's one of those safer crossings across the river.
All great points. I just want to note that we've got about 2 minutes left in this session before we go back to the main room. So Anthony, I'm going to let you and Jimena kind of decide how you want to spend the last couple minutes here.
Okay. Yeah, we can just keep wrapping up on this one, knowing that we just got a minute or so left, and then we'll go back with everybody else.
In that case, I would just like to add that the Hugh Wallace portion that Matt was just discussing, that bridge is part of the Takpa-Ishak bike trail. And at that area, it's just a share row. And then it crosses the bridge and it stops being part of the bike trail shortly thereafter. But that would be an improvement along a designated bike trail if anything could be done there.
The Evangeline Corridor Initiative has a pedestrian path bridge planned across the river, which I'm not here representing Vermilionville, but at Vermilionville was something we're very interested in. But again, something that needs to be funded and move forward and kind of isn't directly related to what y'all are doing.
Yeah, I remember conversation around that back the last time we had these kind of rounds of input. My understanding was that doing like a pedestrian bicycle bridge there from Vermilionville to I think it's Hyman Park was, for whatever engineering reasons, not super feasible, but maybe that has changed. But that would be great. I mean, in my opinion, because Surrey Street, I mean, we miss an opportunity to improve Surrey Street recently. So, and I mean, that's one of those places that we see fatalities and there's no shoulder, no sidewalk, and it's dark and it's kind of downhill both ways towards it. So it's really unsafe.
And it was left out of these corridor segments, but the Surrey Street University crossing, when those J-turns got added in, that put a damper on an already not good pedestrian crossing right there. And so if anything can be done to improve that, that would help as well.
Okay, with that note, Anthony, are you able, or you think now's a good time to wrap and go back?
Yeah, I think now's a good time, and then we can kind of go back in one group and do a quick review of both sessions as one communal group.
That's awesome. Great. Okay, thanks. We'll be moving you back, everybody back into the main room here shortly.
Thank you.
I'm struggling with this section because it's so weird.